A cartoon aardvark once told me that having fun isn't hard if you've got a library card, and he's totally right. Growing up, I was at my local library constantly in search of anything new and interesting I could read. But as the years have gone on, I have found my trips there to be less and less frequent. Don't get me wrong, I still like to read whenever I can. Hell, during a beach vacation last summer, I got so invested in a book about John Landis in the Twilight Zone movie accident that my girlfriend told me I needed to stop telling her about it because I was starting to resemble Homer Simpson when he got obsessed with Thomas Edison. Fuck John Landis, by the way. So it's not like my passion for reading is gone, it's just strictly a time management issue. Now, if I'm given the choice between reading a book or watching its film adaptation, I'll usually be lazy and go with the movie. To clumsily paraphrase a Jim Gaffigan joke, Hot Pocket! Not that one. The one where he says, you know what I enjoyed most about watching the movie version? No reading. Yeah, most of the time, I don't have any regrets about watching the film adaptation. I usually haven't read the book anyways, so it's not like I have anything to compare it to. But I do know that's not the case for everyone. Some people are just more attached to the source material than others, and as someone who used to have elaborate daydreams about joining the cast of USA High, I can relate. For fans of a book, the bar they set for the movie to succeed can be pretty high, and sometimes it does not clear it. Adapting a book into a film is a tricky thing, as it's not like there's some exact formula you can follow. There are movies that made drastic changes and became classics, while others stuck to the source material and flopped. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not an adaptation works is up to the discretion of the audience, and there's no one more invested in its success than its original author. Hollywood has been adapting books into films for over a century, and throughout that entire time, authors have had some pretty varied responses to watching their work. There are those who have praised the films as superior to their own writings, and those who have been disgusted by what they've seen. Even films that are considered classics by audiences are considered trash by their original writers. Now, usually when an author hates a movie, they'll crap on it in the press, then go about their day. But in 1986, one author took a different approach. He was so sick of people telling him directors were ruining his books that he decided to direct the damn thing himself. The only problem was, he had no idea what he was doing. This is Pop Culture Hyperfixations, and today we're taking a look at Stephen King's lone directorial effort, Maximum Overdrive.
My name is Stephen King. I've written several motion pictures, but I want to tell you about a movie called Maximum Overdrive. Come and spend some time in the dark. I'm gonna scare the hell out of you.
Maximum Overdrive, rated R. Starts Friday, July 25th at theaters everywhere.
First gaining national prominence in 1974 with his debut novel Carrie, it didn't take long for Stephen King to become a household name. His unique brand of horror struck a chord with readers of all ages, and within a few years, he was already one of America's most famous authors. Aside from his talent, part of the other reason for King's success was his prolific output. At one point, he was writing at such a frantic pace that he took on the pseudonym of Richard Bachman, just so he could release more of his books without overexposing himself. It's truly remarkable to realize just how many classic books he wrote, especially in the 70s and 80s, including The Shining, The Dark Tower, The Stand, and The Cujo, just to name a few. And don't even get me started on his short stories like The Body or Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. I could go on and on listing his achievements, but why bother when the 1987 film Monster Squad can sum it up in 3 simple words.
Wolfman's got nards!
No, I meant Stephen King rules. I think I gotta fire the guy that edits these. It didn't take long for Hollywood to notice King's talents, as his debut novel quickly became his debut film when Carrie hit theaters in 1976. Directed by Brian De Palma, the film was a success with both audiences and critics. King was incredibly happy with the movie, and not just because the film was so good, but because the popularity of the movie directly led to a huge boost in book sales. In 1979, CBS released a mini-series version of his novel Salem's Lot that, from what I could ascertain, once again pleased critics, audiences, and King. At that point, King was pretty hands-off about the filmmaking process. A self-confessed movie buff, he was pretty eager to see just how people would visually translate his writing. But that eagerness would come to an abrupt end in 1980 with Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. It's pretty common knowledge, but for those who don't know, King hated the movie and waged a public campaign against it. He had numerous complaints, but the one most people cite is King's feeling that Kubrick completely changed Jack Torrance from a recovering alcoholic family man driven insane by the Overlook Hotel to an unhinged prick who resented his family before he even got there. Nowadays, it seems silly that anyone would think The Shining is a bad movie, but King wasn't alone in his distaste for the film, as it was not well received upon its release. Hell, Kubrick even received a nomination for Worst Director at the inaugural Razzie Awards. It took decades of repeat viewings before the film gained its reputation as a classic, especially by people like me, who think it's funny to just keep editing in Roger the dog. I don't know if it was correlation or coincidence, but after The Shining, King started getting a little more proactive when it came to adaptations of his work. In 1982, he made the transition from novelist to screenwriter when he wrote the movie Creepshow. The film not only featured adaptations of a pair of his short stories, but he also appeared in the movie as the dim-witted and doomed Jordy Verrill. But even with his newfound proactiveness, he couldn't be everywhere at once, as the films and shows based on his works were coming out just as fast as the books themselves. 1983 alone would see the film versions of Cujo, Christine, and The Dead Zone all hit theaters. Of all those films, only one had direct involvement from King, as the producer of The Dead Zone had actually commissioned King to take the first crack at writing the screenplay. That man's name was Dino De Laurentiis, and over the next few years, he would play a pivotal part in King's life. An Italian producer who came overseas to conquer America, De Laurentiis was a Hollywood legend. Like King, he was incredibly prolific in his profession, having produced an eclectic array of movies that range from Serpico to Conan the Barbarian. Around the time he entered King's life, he was in the midst of founding his own production company, the De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, that would go on to produce such seminal 80s classics as Manhunter, Blue Velvet, and the best of the worst classic tracks, which means I can say with full accuracy, Dino De Laurentiis had a hand in this moment that I did not alter in any way.
You know what I think of your cookies? That's what I think of your cookies.
Let's move up and win.
Dino very much wanted to be in the Stephen King business, and the author was so impressed with The Dead Zone that they began a working relationship. However, the next one of King's films that De Laurentiis produced was 1984's Firestarter, which might be the worst of all of King's adaptations. King hated the movie, maybe even more so than The Shining, and it would be the only movie during his time with De Laurentiis that he did not write himself. Aside from being another movie that frustrated King, the other relevant note about Firestarter was that it was the first production to be filmed in Dino's new studio in North Carolina. Ever the crafty businessman, Dino had figured out that he could save money by building his own studio in a state where he didn't have to hire union crews and could fire people at will. Following the disaster of Firestarter, King took a hands-on approach, writing the screenplays for the films Cat's Eye and Silver Bullet, as well as beginning work on an adaptation of a short story of his titled Trucks. The story, which first appeared in a 1973 edition of Cavalier magazine, before showing up in King's 1978 anthology Night Shift, is actually one of my favorites. It follows a group of strangers stuck at a rest stop as trucks suddenly come alive and begin killing every human in sight. The story deals with their attempts to understand and escape the predicament before ultimately accepting their fate in a grim ending that sees the survivors seemingly doomed to spend the rest of their days perpetually fueling the machines. It's a great short story, although not one you would have expected to turn into a feature-length film. But what do I know? I didn't produce this.
That's what happens when you don't behave.
After King submitted the script, Dino asked him if he would consider directing it as well. Dino was always thinking about how to market the movies he made, and what would be an easier sell than a debut film from the master of horror himself. According to King, he didn't want the job and had to be convinced. Although Firestarter director Mark Lester theorized in an issue of Cinefastique that King crapped over that adaptation because he ultimately wanted to be the one to direct his books. King disputes that claim. In his version, he did take the director gig, but with the caveat that Dino replaced him if at any point he thought King was doing a bad job. When asked why he chose this movie in particular to direct, King would say that part of the reason was he thought it'd be perfect for a first-time director. The majority of the movie was about machines, and he thought it'd be easier for him to direct trucks than humans.
Oh, you done it now, Jordy Verrill! You monkhead!
The film adaptation was titled Maximum Overdrive, and took the basic premise of the 6-page short story and stretched the idea into a 97-minute feature. Now obviously to do that he had to make a couple changes. First, while the story only featured trucks, the movie would take it up a notch and have it so machines all across the world would suddenly turn homicidal. The other major change would be that while the film's main location would still be a truck stop, they would expand the story to show how the rest of the world was managing the chaos. When it came time to casting the film, King and De Laurentiis quickly disagreed when it came to picking the film's star. King wanted Bruce Springsteen to play the title role, but De Laurentiis put his foot down and said no. It was said enough during my research that I don't even know who to quote on this, that De Laurentiis was an incredibly hands-on producer who would not hesitate to make decisions he thought was best. Ultimately, it was De Laurentiis who cast the lead role when he personally selected a young up-and-comer named Emilio Estevez to play the hero of the story, Bill Robinson. A relative unknown named Laura Harrington would play his love interest Brett, who King envisioned as having a cool, androgynous look. That plan lasted for about 2 scenes before De Laurentiis forced a wardrobe change on the character to make her more feminine. The rest of the film was a mix of locals, unknowns, and that guys, including Burrell from The Wire, Commissioner Gordon from Batman, and one of the bad guys from The Last Dragon. Of the unknown performers in the cast, 2 would end up becoming pop culture icons in their own right. Giancarlo Esposito, who played one of television's greatest villains, Gus Fring, on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, has a small role in the film. So small, in fact, it consists of a single line.
Your mama!
The other unknown had a far more substantial role in the film. Her name was Yardley Smith, but to her legions of fans worldwide, she is best known for her appearance on a season 5 episode of Becker. Or as Lisa Simpson, kinda depends what you're into, I guess. With the cast all set, filming began in the summer of 1985, and the production didn't go well. Let's start with the positives. Almost everyone who worked on the movie had nothing but kind words to say about King. They found him fun to be around and noted that he was very much self-aware of his limitations as the director. And oh man, were there a lot of limitations. There's no way to sugarcoat it, King had no idea what he was doing. I mean, it's not like he didn't try. He had read somewhere that Alfred Hitchcock meticulously planned all the shots in his film during pre-production, that way the actual filming process would be kinda boring. As a rookie director, he found that idea appealing, so he planned out and wrote all of his shots on 1,147 note cards. But a couple weeks into shooting, he realized that strategy was a terrible idea, as it went against the improvisational creative instincts that made him such a great writer. Adding to his woes was the crew Dino had hired. While there were locals from the nascent North Carolina film scene hired, the majority of the prominent production roles were filled by experienced professionals. The problem was, they were all Italian, and none of them spoke English. Laura Harrington has said in interviews that while the crew were good at their jobs, they were so used to filming movies that would later be dubbed that they would just talk at full volume while the actors were trying to deliver their dialogue. The senior member of the Italian contingent, Armando Nannuzzi, was hired not just to be the cinematographer, but to essentially shadow King and teach him how to direct. King was clueless about even basic filmmaking procedures, and even though he sought advice from Nannuzzi, as well as directors George Romero and David Lynch, it was actually the actor Pat Hingle that he credits with teaching him the most. King wasn't the only inexperienced part of the production, as the stunt team was also pretty green. Multiple cast members, including child actor Holter Graham, have told stories of stunts that nearly injured or killed them. While the actors escaped major harm, Armando Nannuzzi would not be so lucky. During a scene that involved a killer lawnmower, King insisted against Nannuzzi's advice on keeping the blades spinning in the mower, despite the fact that they would not be visible. During production, an accident occurred that would see a shard of wood enter Nannuzzi's eye, permanently blinding him. While the production would only shut down for a week and Nannuzzi would return to work, he would never find steady work in the film world again. He would go on to sue De Laurentiis and King for $18 million, although he reportedly settled for just under $1 million. But even with an Italian crew, hands-on producer, and dangerous stunts, the biggest problem with the film was Stephen King. And not because he was inexperienced, but because he was either drunk or on cocaine the entire time.
I don't think any of us expected him to say that.
Yeah, King would categorize himself as coked out of his mind during the making of the movie, but most of the crew noticed his drinking problem more, with translator Robert Croce telling Slash Film that by the time it was 8:30, King was already 10 beers in. Even if he didn't know it yet, he was knee-deep in his alcoholism at that point, and King would later admit that he doesn't remember a lot about making the movie. As for the cocaine, I'm gonna theorize, without any proof, that that drug probably came into play during the night shoots. On top of directing a feature film, he was still working on his novel It every night, so I imagine he may have sought some chemical assistance to deal with his lack of sleep. Still, for all the negatives about the production, there were still some rays of light. For starters, the cast all seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company, whether it be from dealing with the oppressively hot North Carolina summer, or the growing realization of what kind of movie they had signed up for. They all seemed to kinda trauma bond from the experience. The film was a huge deal to Wilmington locals as well, who were so excited that Hollywood had come to their city that local papers published multiple articles interviewing people with roles like Woman Number 1. There was another small role that was eventually cut from the film, but I want to quickly mention it because it's kind of interesting. As part of a cross-promotion with Pepsi, a radio station in Bangor, Maine King owned and WZON ran a contest for a small role in the movie. 5-year-old Brewer, Maine native Mandy Borelli won, but because she was so young, her dad Walter took her place and got a cameo in the opening scene. Unfortunately, he was cut, but so was a lot of stuff. The film initially received an X rating from the MPAA, and numerous gory scenes had to be shortened to get it down to an R. While initially scheduled for a March 1986 release, King convinced the studio that it would behoove them to release his self-described moron movie during the summer instead. And so, on July 25th, 1986, Maximum Overdrive would hit theaters, and now it's finally time for my review of the film, so do you mind giving me a hand here, Jay?
It stinks.
Oh baby, does this movie blow. I consider myself a connoisseur of bad films, but Maximum Overdrive really pushed my limits. I mean, I should have known better when the opening of the film is a completely unnecessary wall of text that explains stuff that doesn't need to be explained. As we talked about earlier, the plot of the movie is about killer machines, and those parts are awesome. I have almost no complaints about any scene involving the Machine Rebellion, especially this incredible bit here of a steamroller running over a kid, which Monster Vision host Joe Bob Briggs claimed even made George Romero queasy. Now obviously in a film about driverless killer trucks, it's gonna be hard to make the villain stand out, but I gotta give credit to King for giving the main antagonist semi-truck a Green Goblin face. It looks really cool. Aside from the trucks themselves, the other highlight is the soundtrack, which was done entirely by AC/DC. I am not on an island with that, as virtually every modern review I watched or listened to all share the same viewpoint that the soundtrack kicks ass. King wrote a lot of the scenes for the film with their music in mind and reached out to the band personally. They released their album Who Made Who in conjunction to the film, which aside from the title track, also featured some of their biggest hits. The album was actually a pretty big success for the band, so much so that they gifted King a special guitar to thank him. I'm not the world's biggest AC/DC fan, but their music does level up the film significantly. Unfortunately, not even AC/DC can save the film from itself, as no matter how rad Hell's Bells is, it can only do so much to add excitement to a montage of people pumping gas. And ultimately, that's where the failure of the movie is. The people. I don't think any of the actors are exceptionally bad in the movie, but it's a frustrating combination of those who chewed the scenery and those who barely took a bite. I love Emilio Estevez, but he is doing nothing for me here. And I don't think him and Laura Harrington have any real chemistry. Other than Pat Hingle and Christopher Murney having a blast as a pair of unlikable creeps, a lot of the other characters are pretty unremarkable. And the ones that do stand out aren't for good reasons. Lisa Simpson rules, but Yeardley Smith's character in this movie is just so annoying. Most of her dialogue is just her yelling at her husband Curtis. Speaking of yelling, the most infamous piece of bad acting in the movie is by Ellen Macduff's Wanda June, who delivers an angry soliloquy that even make Macbeth jealous.
You can! We made you!
The movie is so uneven, as we go from these pretty exciting action sequences to long stretches of time spent with characters I just don't care about. For as drunk and coked out as he was, even King realized how bad those moments were. In interviews, he talked about being forced to add those dramatic elements, derisively referring to them as the John and Marcia scenes. Unlike the original short story, which ends with the protagonist's existentialist crisis over the potential end of humanity, the end of Maximum Overdrive sees our heroes escape the truck stop, blow up the Green Goblin, and sail away to safety. Oh, and it turns out, whole thing was aliens. Yeah, it's a pretty lackluster ending. And kinda comes out of nowhere, so it shouldn't come as a shock to find out that was not the original ending. According to visual effects artist Dean Gates, the original ending would have seen another action sequence as the boat they're on attempts to kill them and gives one last final scare for the audience. But remember how production shut down for a week when Armando Iannucci lost his eye? Well, Dino De Laurentiis remembered that too, and rather than adding time to the schedule to make up for it, he decided the movie was good enough as is. Well, audiences did not agree, as the movie flopped at the box office, making less than $8 million during its run. Yeardley Smith has said that the movie flopped so quickly, she went from being prepped as the breakout star of the movie to having all her talk show appearances cancelled in an instant. Critics were even harder on the movie, with Jim Schertzer of the Winston-Salem Journal writing, "Maximum Overdrive is based on two absolutely terrifying notions. The first is that motor vehicles might be even more deadly without humans at the wheel. The second is that Stephen King is any kind of movie director." King received a Razzie nomination for Worst Director, which you have to think Stanley Kubrick must have found delightful. This film would be the last time King and De Laurentiis worked together, and although they never made a great movie together, a dinner between the pair did lead to De Laurentiis financing Evil Dead 2, so at least we got that. King himself has been the hardest on the film, and he's never tried to deflect the blame onto anyone but himself. According to Emilio Estevez, every time he runs into King, King continuously apologizes for any harm the movie may have caused his career. But any harm King may have caused to the movie adaptations of his own work lasted less than 2 weeks, when an adaptation of The Body titled Stand By Me hit theaters to much acclaim. King's works would continue to be adapted for years to come, with various levels of his involvement. He would write several of them, but never direct again, although he did come incredibly close to directing an adaptation of his book Gerald's Game, before eventually handing the reins over to Mike Flanagan. As it was before Maximum Overdrive, the adaptations would continue to fluctuate in quality, although King is a lot more reticent to offer any of his negative opinions. Whether it's sobriety, maturity, or the humbling he got from the response to Maximum Overdrive, he now often takes the approach of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Like so many so bad it's good movies, Maximum Overdrive has built a cult following and dedicated fanbase. Among them is former video store owner Tim Shockey, who purchased the original Green Goblin head and spent years restoring it before bringing it on tour to various conventions in North America. Not to be outdone is a gentleman named Trent Clark out of Pennsylvania, who took it a step further and has made a complete replica of the Happy Toys truck. He also tours across America. With the rise of technology over the last few decades, there have been plenty of thought experiments about what a reboot or sequel would look like. Stephen King's own son, Joe Hill, has expressed interest in making his own version, and during the 2023 writer's strike, Emilio Estevez wrote a sequel film for fun that he thought was good enough that he tried to gauge any interest in getting it greenlit. But what most people don't know is there already was another version of Maximum Overdrive already made. The film was called Trucks, and while it was originally conceived as a pilot for a King-centric television series, it ultimately ended up as a USA Network made-for-TV movie. Now if you can, think about all the bad things I just said about Maximum Overdrive, and keep that in mind when I say this. Trucks is so much worse. It's an absolute slog of a movie that loosely resembles the premise of Maximum Overdrive, but retains none of the charm. All the movie really has going for it is a superior ending to Maximum Overdrive that calls back to the book's grim conclusion, as well as this insane scene of a mailman being repeatedly run over by a toy truck that goes on forever. It's a super boring movie that really lacks the parts that made Maximum Overdrive memorable. And by that, I mean the heart. Or the cocaine. It depends how you look at it, I guess. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please hit like. If you want to see more of the stuff I make, please hit subscribe. Both help me out a lot. And what do you think of Maximum Overdrive? Is it a disaster or a masterpiece? Let me know in the comments below. And before anyone asks, no, I will not accept any one of you telling me it's a disaster piece.